In the small coastal town of Kasiwa, life was never quiet. The ocean waves sang their daily songs, fishermen shouted by the shore, and children ran through the dusty streets with laughter that carried far. In the middle of this busy town lived a young woman named Amara. She did not have much, but what she had she built with her own hands. Every morning before the sun had fully risen, she would wake up, tie her scarf neatly, and head to the market. She sold handmade baskets and fruits, saving every coin with hope in her heart. People admired her for her discipline and kindness. Though she lived in a small rented room with cracked walls and a leaking roof, Amara dreamed of something bigger. A future where she could rest in her own home, eat without counting coins, and share her life with someone who truly loved her. She carried her struggles with quiet strength, never complaining, only working harder. Deep inside, she believed that one day all her sacrifices would be worth it. The town knew her as the girl with a gentle smile and determined eyes, a woman who was writing her story with patience and faith. Amara never expected love to walk into her life the way Juma did. He came with a confident smile, the kind of smile that made people feel safe, and words that flowed like honey. At first, she thought he was just another smooth-talking man from town, but Juma was patient. He listened to her stories about her long days at the market, about her dreams of owning a home, and about how she hoped to one day build a life where she no longer had to count coins before buying food. His attention felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. For the first time, Amara allowed herself to believe that maybe love was real, and maybe it had found her at last. Juma was everything she thought she needed. He walked her home after market days, carried her heavy baskets, and told her she deserved the world. People in Kasiwa began whispering that they looked perfect together. Amara felt proud whenever she saw the way he introduced her as his future wife. Slowly, her walls broke down. She trusted him with her secrets, her hopes, and eventually, with the little savings she had worked years to gather, Juma spoke of marriage, of building a home together, and of raising children in laughter and love. He painted pictures so vivid that Amara began to see them in her dreams. When he asked to borrow her savings to prepare their future, she didn't hesitate. She believed every word. After all, wasn't this what love meant? Sharing, trusting, and building together? In her heart there was no space for doubt. She believed Juma's love was pure, that his promises were real, and that her sacrifices would soon turn into the family she always wanted. Amara had no idea that behind Juma's sweet words hid a secret that would tear her world apart. While Amara was dreaming of wedding dresses and a happy home, Juma was living a double life. His heart, the same heart he swore belonged to Amara, was still chained to his ex, Zina. Everyone in town knew their history. Zina was beautiful, bold, and came from a family that believed their daughter deserved only the best. But when Juma once failed to give her the life she wanted, she left him without looking back. What Amara didn't know was that Juma never stopped chasing the shadow of Zina's love. When she suddenly returned to Kasiwa, his old feelings rushed back like a storm. Juma saw in Amara not a partner, but an opportunity. The coin she had saved with sweat and sleepless nights became his golden ticket. He convinced Amara that he was securing their future, but instead he used the money to impress Zina. Behind closed doors, he promised her a wedding that would silence every gossiping mouth in town. He paid for a grand venue, fine clothes, and a new house, all with the money that Amara had counted one coin at a time. Amara continued to trust him, preparing herself to become his wife, while Juma secretly prepared to marry someone else. The betrayal was not just in his actions, but in the way he smiled at Amara, kissed her forehead, and told her she was his only love, even as he spent her savings on another woman. Each day she thought she was walking closer to her dream, but in truth, she was unknowingly financing her own heartbreak. The people who knew whispered in corners, afraid to tell her the truth. They pitied her, but no one had the courage to break her heart before Juma's wedding did. Amara was living in a sweet illusion, never imagining that the man she trusted most was carefully building her deepest wound. It was an ordinary morning in Kasiwa when Amara's world began to crack. She was arranging her baskets in the market, humming softly as she always did, when the sharp voices of two women nearby caught her attention. They were gossiping, their tone excited, almost playful. At first, Amara didn't think much of it, until she clearly heard Juma's name mixed with another, Zina. Her hands froze. She leaned closer without meaning to, her heart suddenly pounding. The women spoke of a wedding, a big one with music, feasting, and a new house that everyone in town was talking about. Zina is finally getting the wedding she deserves, one woman whispered, laughing. Amara felt her chest tighten, the air leaving her lungs. Surely they were mistaken. Surely this was a cruel rumor that jealous tongues had twisted together. She tried to brush it off, forcing a smile as if the words had not just stabbed her heart. But the seed of doubt was planted. That evening when she walked home, her feet carried her not to her little room, but toward the house where Juma's family lived. She wanted to prove the gossip wrong. She wanted to see something, anything that would calm the storm inside her. What she found instead broke her soul. On the wooden table near the entrance lay a shiny invitation card, decorated in gold and red. She picked it up with trembling hands, her eyes struggling to focus. The words blurred at first, but then they came into painful clarity. The wedding of Juma and Zina. Her knees weakened and she almost fell. The man she had trusted with her heart, her future, and her savings was preparing to marry another woman. Tears filled her eyes, but she swallowed them back quickly before anyone could see. That night, lying on her thin mattress, she stared at the ceiling, unable to breathe normally. The whispers in the market were no longer rumors. They were her reality. The life she had been building was not just stolen. It was being celebrated in her face. Amara felt that night, Amara cried until her pillow was soaked. Every tear carried the weight of her years of sacrifice. Every sob carried the sound of broken trust. She felt as if her chest had been cut open, as if the whole town was laughing at her behind closed doors. But when the morning sun crept through her cracked window, something inside her shifted. She sat up slowly, her eyes swollen but sharp. Pain was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the kind of pain that begged for pity. It was the kind of pain that demanded strength. Amara stood before her little mirror, wiped her face and whispered to herself, "I will not let this break me." For the first time, her voice carried not just sadness but fire. She thought of all the nights she had gone to bed hungry while saving money, of all the mornings she had woken before dawn to work in the market. That money was her blood, her sweat, her years, and she would not allow it to become the foundation of Juma and Zina's happiness. She refused to be the woman everyone pitied, the woman whose love story became a joke. If Juma had written betrayal into her life, then she would write justice into his. She promised herself that her story would not end in shame but in a lesson the whole town would remember. She didn't know yet how she would do it, but she knew she had to fight back. Amara's heart was still bleeding, but her spirit began to harden like steel. Instead of walking with her head down, she lifted her chin and carried her pain with dignity. She was no longer just a heartbroken woman. She was a storm preparing to rise. Juma had taken her savings, but he had awakened something far more powerful. A fire that would burn his lies to the ground. The town of Kasiwa buzzed with excitement as Juma and Zina's wedding day drew near. Everywhere Amara turned, she heard people talking about it. The musicians who had been hired, the cooks who were preparing feasts big enough to feed the whole town, the bright clothes that guests were already buying to attend. Juma walked through the streets with his chest out, smiling as if he owned the world. Zina, with her proud strut and expensive jewelry, made sure everyone knew she was about to marry a man who could give her the life she always demanded. They bragged about the new house that had been built, a house painted in fresh colors, with wide windows and polished floors. People admired it whenever they passed by, whispering about how lucky Zina was. But no one said the truth aloud, that the money for that house did not come from Juma's hard work, but from Amara's years of sacrifice. Every brick, every nail, every drop of paint was soaked with her sweat. Yet Juma and Zina laughed, planning to dance in its halls as though it belonged to them. The wedding preparations were extravagant. Goats and cows were bought for slaughter, barrels of sweet palm wine were delivered, and drummers practiced beats that echoed through the air. It was the kind of wedding that would be remembered in Kasiwa for years. Juma enjoyed every moment of showing off, while Zina sneered at anyone who doubted her new position as his wife. Amara watched from a distance, her heart twisting with both pain and anger. The house that was supposed to be her safe place had become their trophy. The savings she had guarded like treasure had turned into their pride. But while they celebrated openly, Amara kept quiet, holding her silence like a weapon. She knew something they didn't. The house, the very thing they bragged about, would one day become their greatest humiliation. And that thought gave her the strength to endure the whispers and the laughter around her. Amara knew that shouting in the streets or fighting Juma and Zina with insults would only make her look weak. They wanted her broken, embarrassed, and humiliated. She refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead, she swallowed her pain and wore a calm face. People thought she had accepted her fate, but deep inside she was planning carefully step by step. Her silence was not defeat, it was her weapon. One morning, she dressed neatly and walked to the local council office. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart was steady. She asked to see the property documents for the new house, the one Juma and Zina boasted about daily. The clerk handed her the file, and as she flipped through the pages, her lips curved into the smallest smile. Every receipt, every record, every payment was linked to her name. The house was not Juma's. It was not Zina's. It legally belonged to Amara. She left the office with her head held high, her chest burning not with pain this time but with power. For weeks, she returned quietly to ensure everything was in order. She asked questions politely, confirmed details, and signed what needed signing. No one suspected what she was doing. While Juma bragged in bars and Zina showed off her new dresses, Amara was securing the ground beneath their feet and preparing to pull it away. At night, lying on her thin mattress, she no longer cried. Instead, she imagined the day when Juma would stand proudly beside Zina, only for the truth to crash down on them like thunder. She promised herself she would not raise her voice until the perfect moment, when silence would turn into the loudest revenge. Amara was no longer just a victim of betrayal. She was becoming the author of Juma's downfall, one quiet signature at a time. The long-awaited day finally arrived, and the whole town of Kisiwa seemed to stop for Juma and Zina's wedding. The streets were alive with music, the sharp sound of drums mixing with the sweet rhythm of flutes. Women wore bright dresses, their beads clinking as they danced, while men gathered in groups laughing loudly, ready to feast and drink until nightfall. Children ran about, chasing each other, their joy adding to the noise. It was the kind of day when every eye turned toward the bride and groom, and Juma walked proudly, enjoying every glance of admiration. Zina, covered in gold jewelry and a gown that sparkled under the sun, basked in the attention as if she were already a queen. Amara was there too, but not in the way anyone expected. She did not wear an expensive dress, nor did she arrive in grand style. She came quietly, dressed in a simple but neat outfit, her scarf tied firmly around her head. She sat at the edge of the gathering unnoticed by most, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Yet her eyes carried something no one could understand. A fire that refused to die, a strength that no humiliation could take away. People whispered when they noticed her. Some pitied her, others shook their heads, wondering why she had the courage to even show her face. But Amara ignored their whispers. She had not come to cry or beg. She had come to watch, to wait, and to let the stage be set perfectly for what was about to unfold. As the music grew louder and the guests clapped to the rhythm, Amara sat still, her heart beating steadily. To anyone else she looked like a quiet, broken woman. But deep inside she knew the truth. This was not Juma and Zina's day of victory. It was the day their pride would crumble, and their laughter would turn into the kind of silence that even drums could not cover. The sun hung high in the sky as the crowd gathered around the altar, clapping and cheering. Juma stood there in his finest robe, his face shining with pride. He held Zina's hand tightly, smiling so wide it seemed like he had won a prize no one else could touch. Every time he glanced at Amara sitting quietly in the crowd, a small smirk played at the corner of his lips. In his heart he mocked her pain. To him, she was the foolish girl who had worked hard only to hand over her life to him. He believed he had beaten her, that she would forever carry the shame of being used and discarded. Zina, glowing in her golden dress, clung to him with triumph in her eyes. She felt as though the whole town was watching her victory. Together they looked like the perfect couple, saying words of love and loyalty that filled the air. But to Amara those vows were daggers. Every "I promise" and "forever" sounded like a cruel joke, a performance meant to erase her years of sacrifice. The guests cheered loudly as the vows ended, music rising again in celebration. Juma puffed out his chest, feeling untouchable. He believed the world belonged to him, that Amara would fade into the background while he built a new life with Zina. He never noticed that her calm silence was more dangerous than any scream. Amara did not look away. Her eyes stayed locked on him, steady and unshaken. She saw through his pride, through his lies, and through his arrogance. Juma thought he had written the final chapter of her story. What he didn't know was that Amara was holding the real ending close to her chest, and soon, in front of all these witnesses, she would turn his vows of love into his greatest humiliation. The altar he stood on so proudly was about to become the stage of his downfall. The wedding feast had just begun, and the air was thick with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted meat. Guests clapped their hands as drums beat louder, women danced in circles, and children ran around with plates of food. Juma sat proudly at the head table, Zina beside him, her face glowing as she showed off her new jewelry. They looked around at the crowd like royalty, drinking in the admiration and attention. For a moment it seemed as though nothing could ruin their day. But then the noise began to fade. The drums slowed, the dancers stopped, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. A group of officials stepped inside, their presence commanding silence. The room shifted from laughter to confusion. Whispers spread like fire. "What's happening?" someone asked in a hushed voice. Juma frowned, annoyed that anything would dare interrupt his celebration. The lead official cleared his throat and held up a folder of documents. His voice was steady as he announced, "We are here regarding the house claimed by Juma and Zina. Records confirm that this property does not belong to either of them. The rightful owner is Amara." The words dropped like thunder. The hall erupted with gasps, shouts, and murmurs. Some guests covered their mouths in shock, others looked straight at Amara, who sat quietly in her simple dress, her head held high. Juma's proud smile froze on his lips. Zina's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she grabbed his arm. The officials placed the stamped documents on the table for everyone to see, leaving no room for argument. "The house is registered under Amara's name. Any claim by Juma or Zina is invalid," the official concluded firmly. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. The very foundation of Juma's bragging had just been torn away in front of everyone. His feast, his pride, his perfect image, all shattered with a single announcement. And Amara didn't need to say a word. Her silence was louder than the drums, her calm dignity more powerful. The moment the officials finished their announcement, the wedding that had been filled with laughter suddenly broke into uneasy silence. Then, like waves crashing on the shore, the whispers began. People leaned close to each other, covering their mouths, their eyes darting from Juma to Amara. Some gasped loudly, others chuckled under their breath, and a few shook their heads in disbelief. The same guests who had been cheering moments earlier were now pointing fingers and murmuring, "So the house isn't his? It belongs to Amara." Juma's wide, confident smile collapsed into a stiff mask. His eyes darted around the crowd, searching for support, but instead of admiration he saw judgment. The pride he had carried all day slipped through his fingers like sand. Zina, seated beside him, grew pale. Her lips trembled as she gripped her gown tightly, her jewels suddenly feeling heavy and worthless. This was not the fairy tale she had promised herself. This was a nightmare unraveling before the entire town. Laughter broke out in corners of the gathering. Some of the same men who had toasted to Juma's success now mocked him with cruel grins. Women whispered loudly enough for Zina to hear, saying things like, "She thought she won, but look at her now." The children, too young to understand the weight of betrayal, giggled at the sudden chaos, their laughter only adding to the humiliation. Food was left untouched, music stopped, and the drummers set down their sticks in confusion. The celebration that was meant to announce Juma and Zina's new beginning had turned into a stage for their downfall. Their perfect life crumbled before it could even start, collapsing in front of the very people they had tried to impress. Through it all, Amara remained calm. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue. She sat still, watching the scene unfold with quiet strength. The silence she carried was louder than the crowd's gossip. In that moment she no longer looked like the woman who had. Zina's face twisted with rage as the reality sank in. The jewels on her neck glittered, but her eyes burned with fire. She pushed her chair back so hard it screeched across the floor, and the guests closest to her stepped away, afraid of the storm they saw rising in her. "You fool!" she shouted at Juma, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "You promised me a home, you promised me security, and all this time you were using stolen money?" Her words cut sharper than any knife. The crowd gasped again, this time louder, as Zina stood trembling, her fists clenched. She had thought this day would make her the envy of every woman in Kasiwa. She had imagined walking proudly into her new house, showing the world that she had chosen well. But instead she was standing in front of hundreds of eyes, exposed and humiliated. The fairy tale she bragged about had turned into ashes before the ink on her vows was even dry. Juma tried to calm her, whispering desperate words, but Zina shoved his hand away. "Don't touch me," she cried, her voice breaking. "You dragged me into your lies. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." Her anger grew wild, and she no longer cared about the guests watching. Tears of fury rolled down her cheeks, smudging the makeup she had carefully worn for this day. The hall erupted again in whispers and chuckles. Some pitied her, but many enjoyed the drama, shaking their heads as they muttered, "This is what greed brings." The bride who once looked untouchable now stood broken, her gown heavy and useless, her crown of pride shattered. Meanwhile, Amara sat quietly, her calm presence making Zina's rage look even louder and more desperate. She didn't need to scream or fight. Her silence was enough. Zina's fairy tale had ended before it began, and the whole town was there to witness her fall. As the hall shook with shouts, gasps, and Zina's angry cries, Amara remained still. She did not rise from her seat, nor did she clap her hands in triumph. She simply sat there, her back straight, her chin lifted, and her eyes calm. While Juma stammered excuses and Zina screamed like a woman betrayed, Amara's silence spoke louder than any insult could. She did not need to argue or defend herself. The truth was already shining for all to see. Guests began to notice her composure. Some whispered, "Look at her, she's not even shouting." Others nodded with respect, realizing that the woman they once pitied was now the strongest person in the room. Her quiet dignity sliced deeper than Zina's rage and Juma's broken pride. Every second she remained calm was a reminder that she had won, not through revenge that left her dirty, but through wisdom and patience that lifted her high. Juma tried to look her way, his lips trembling as if to beg, but Amara did not give him even a glance of pity. She had cried her tears in private. She would not waste another drop on him in public. Her heart was no longer heavy with pain. Instead, it carried a strange peace, the peace of knowing justice had been served. When the officials finished their work and left, the hall remained noisy with gossip, but Amara slowly rose. The crowd parted for her without her asking, their eyes following her every step. She walked out with steady grace, leaving behind the chaos she did not belong to. In that moment, she was not the girl Juma had betrayed. She was the woman who had reclaimed her power. Her silence became her crown. And as the town of Kasiwa whispered her name that night, it was not with pity anymore. It was with respect. Amara's calm victory had become the story that no one would ever forget. Juma's pride, which had once filled the hall like a trumpet, was now crushed under the weight of his own lies. His face, which only moments ago carried a wide smile, was wet with sweat and desperation. He reached out toward Amara as she walked away, his voice trembling. "Amara, please wait, let me explain," he begged, his words stumbling over themselves. But she did not stop and she did not turn back. His pleas echoed in the hall, swallowed by the whispers and laughter of the guests who now saw him for what he truly was, a man who built his dreams on betrayal. For years Juma had walked through Kasiwa with his chest high, acting untouchable, mocking others who had less. He had believed that with Zina by his side, he would rise above everyone. But now, as the truth spread like wildfire, his arrogance turned into his chains. The same people who once admired his charm now pointed at him with disgust. Children giggled at his fallen face, and elders shook their heads, muttering, "A greedy man never keeps his blessings." Zina stood beside him, furious and humiliated, her once bright eyes now sharp with blame. She hissed at him in anger, accusing him of dragging her name into the mud. "You made me a laughingstock, Juma. You've ruined everything," she cried, pulling her gown away from his touch. Their new marriage, which was supposed to be the beginning of a golden life, was already poisoned by shame and mistrust. Juma lowered his head, unable to meet the eyes of the crowd. He had lost more than money, more than a house. He had lost his dignity, his respect, and the woman who truly loved him. Amara had walked away with her pride, while he was left standing in the ruins of his arrogance. The groom who once believed he had outsmarted everyone was now the most pitiful man in Kasiwa, exposed and empty-handed. That night, while Juma and Zina wandered the streets looking for a place to hide their shame, Amara lay peacefully in her own home. The same walls that Juma had tried to steal now felt like a fortress of strength around her. She did not need loud celebrations or crowds of people to feel victorious. Her calm heart and steady breath were proof that she had won. In Kisiwa, her story spread quickly. People whispered about the woman who had turned her tears into fire and her pain into power. Mothers told their daughters about her strength, and fathers reminded their sons that greed always destroys. Amara had not only reclaimed her house but also reclaimed her dignity. She showed everyone that silence can be louder than screams, and that true power does not come from revenge, but from standing tall with grace. As she sat by her window watching the stars that night, Amara felt no bitterness in her chest. The hurt Juma caused would always be a scar, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it became her reminder that even in betrayal, there is a chance for rebirth. She knew her future would not be easy, but it would be hers, built on her strength, not on anyone else's lies. And in the heart of Kisiwa, her name lived on as a lesson. Betrayal may break a heart, but resilience always rebuilds it stronger.